We're going into this story about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders actually delivered a speech recently in reference to the situation in Gaza. I feel that it was short-sighted. I feel that ultimately, out of everything that he says in this speech, the one thing that he does not say is that he does not call for a ceasefire. Now more people are starting to call Bernie Sanders out because he's not calling for a ceasefire. So Bernie's not looking too good right now. I want to get started with this speech, and then we're going to venture into some other things here that's going on. Who is standing up? Who are the senators that are coming forward and are calling for a ceasefire? And you may be surprised at who they are.
The situation in Gaza today is a disaster. Congress must take action. The administration must take action. The world must take action. Today, 3 weeks after Hamas's barbaric attack against civilians in Israel, which began this war, many hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza are on the brink. Over the past 3 weeks, it is estimated that some 8,000 people in Gaza have been killed in bombings, including more than 3,000 children.
It's over 9,000 people now, you guys, just FYI.
And far more have been wounded. More than 1 million people in Gaza have been displaced from their homes, and some 670,000 are sheltering in UN installations where they are down to 1 liter of water per person per day. They lack sufficient food, water, medical supplies, or fuel. The hospitals and medical facilities there are in nightmarish conditions, with hundreds of babies in incubators and patients on life support at risk of death should the generators that sustain them run out of fuel. Corridors are lined with injured and displaced people, and overwhelmed doctors must turn patients away or operate without anesthesia or antibiotics. The humanitarian crisis is dire and getting worse by the minute. There must be a humanitarian pause now so that sufficient supplies, food, water, medicine, fuel, can reach the people of Gaza.
Let me tell you what he's actually saying here. He's not calling for a ceasefire. What he's saying is, let's pause all this for now so we can get the supplies into the people in Gaza. Then once we get the supplies in, they want to give Israel the green light to continue bombing the Palestinian people. That's the problem with everything that he's saying here. He's not calling for a ceasefire. And there's more. Just wait for it.
If not, thousands more will die needlessly. We cannot allow that to happen. A stop to the bombing is critical to save innocent lives and secure the safe return of hostages.
So, let me show you something. Here's the problem. So, you know, Bernie Sanders really fooled a lot of people when he was running for president. But Bernie Sanders is just like all the other politicians. Bernie Sanders is full of shit. Shout out to neoliberal tears for this. Watch this. Now, this was from the New Yorker. Bernie is annoyed that people are talking about a genocide instead of labor strikes. Genocide is so annoying, ... Look at this. Even Bernie Sanders, the most consistently pro-Palestinian senator, he also once lived in Israel, was not eager to take a vanguardist position on the issue. He finds the Israel situation depressing, and he's annoyed that people are talking about this instead of labor strikes. How dare people talk about and pay attention to genocide? How dare people talk about what's happening abroad? Talk about these labor strikes, goddammit, says Bernie Sanders. Stop talking about this conflict. You're pissing me off. Bernie doesn't think we should be discussing this. We should be talking about the labor strikes as if we can't talk about both. But which one is more pressing issue at this point in time? But this wasn't the first. We're going to go back a couple of years because I never saw this video or this article until today. And I'll be very clear with you. If I saw this video back in 2014, when this happened, I would have never, ever supported Bernie Sanders. And I damn sure wouldn't have donated any money to Bernie Sanders campaigns. But I'm going to show you this because I want to show you this is who Bernie Sanders always was on this particular issue. Look at this. This came from Andre. Andre shared Bernie Sanders justifies Israel's attacks on civilians in Gaza, claiming Palestinians launch missiles from populated areas. When the audience objects, he yells, "Shut up." This video is from 2014. Watch this. This is how he really felt about this issue. This was before he ran for president. Okay, people? Listen.
Excuse me, shut up. Hamas is sending missiles into Israel. Okay. And you know where some of those missiles are coming from? They're coming from populated areas. That's a fact. Hamas has used money that came into Gaza for construction purposes, and God knows they need roads and all the things that they need, and used some of that money to build these very sophisticated tunnels into Israel for military purposes.
For survival purposes.
Okay, one second.
Yes,
no, I don't want to be interrupted. The question was asked. It's a fair question.
So that person in the audience said for survival purposes, just FYI. That's what they said in the audience.
The question was asked. It's a fair question. And I'm trying to... If you don't...
Yes, they did.
You know, excuse me, shut up. Excuse me, shut up.
That's how Bernie Sanders felt about this issue, even going all the way back then. And if you don't trust the video, there was also an article written about this actual event. It was in the Washington Post. August 20th, 2014, answering question on Israel, Bernie Sanders tells town hall hecklers to shut up. You see this? He goes on to say here at a town hall meeting in Cabot, Vermont over the weekend, Senator began to answer a question about the conflict by saying that Israel had overreacted, but that Hamas was firing missiles into Israel from populated areas, and later said the militant Palestinian Islamic group did not want Israel to exist. Several people in the audience began screaming over each other at Sanders. "Excuse me, shut up," Sanders yelled. "You don't have the microphone. You know I don't want police officers here." Hold on to this statement right here. Don't want police officers here. Someone said, "What are you going to do? Arrest people?" "No, I'm not going to arrest people, but are you going to allow us to have a discussion?" He shot back. After some more yelling, Sanders raised his voice, "I'm trying to answer a question and I don't want to be disturbed." And even after that, there was more heckling and some profanity directed Sanders' way. Progressives have wanted Sanders to be more forceful in condemning Israel. Before Congress' August recess, the Senate passed a resolution unanimously reaffirming its support for Israel. Sanders did not object, but he also did not sign on as a co-sponsor. So this is what Bernie Sanders does. Look at this. Sanders did not object. So he didn't object the resolution for the Senate to reaffirm its support to Israel, but he also didn't sign on as a co-sponsor. This is what Bernie Sanders does. He been trying to walk in the middle too. I told you some other politicians do it. He pretends like he's so far to the left, but he be trying to walk in the middle too. There was actually a protest at Bernie Sanders' office this morning about this particular issue. How does Bernie Sanders allow other senators to call for a ceasefire before him? How does he even allow this to happen? So the protest in his office, this was shared by Jessica Burbank. She's one of the co-hosts of The Hills Rising. It says protesters with DSA Palestine at Senator Sanders' office.
They were both killed. This is Bassan. Bassan was passionate about getting Gazans cancer treatment. You know why? Because Israel requires a permit when you have cancer. When you're a 2-year-old and you have cancer, you need a permit to leave Gaza to get cancer treatment in Israel. And these two people that Israel killed were part of a community trying to make sure no Gazan child, no Gazan has to die because they don't have cancer treatment. This is who Israel is targeting. They were both killed.
Let me pause there. What she's saying there is true. We've talked about this before on this show, that yes, there are hospitals in Gaza, but the thing is, if you need to get like specialized treatment, if you need to get cancer treatment, for example, you need to go to the hospitals that are in Israel. Remember, what the resources they have in Gaza, they get the short end of the stick. They have what's left over. It's not like they have the best facilities. You wanted the better facilities, you have to go into Israel for that, but you have to get a passport approved for that. And it's not uncommon for Israel to not approve the passport for you to come in and get the surgery. Now, Bernie Sanders doesn't want to call for a ceasefire. He calls for a humanitarian pause. The fuck? Pause the firing for a bit, ladies and gentlemen. Pause the firing for a bit. Let us bring in the resources, the food, the water, and all that jazz, and then you can go back to what you were doing. However, Senator Dick Durbin, who I never heard of until today, apparently has called for a ceasefire. In fact, he was the first senator to do so. It says here, Senator Dick Durbin is officially the first U.S. senator to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, 26 days into a brutal airstrike campaign by the Israeli military, which killed over 9,000 Palestinians in Gaza, according to Palestinian health officials. So if you didn't know who he was, this is who this person is. Dick Durbin. We know who he is now, and you'll get a chance to hear from him as well from this interview on CNN.
I think a lot of people listening to people in power, President, you, Secretary Blinken, calling for a humanitarian pause, are asking themselves, why is that different from a ceasefire? 2 years ago, 2021, during an escalation of violence between Israel and Gaza, you called for a ceasefire and you said you, quote, couldn't disagree more with Netanyahu's policies, quote, when it came to the treatment of Palestinians. Is a ceasefire needed now?
I think it is, at least in the context of both sides agreeing. For example, the release of those who have been kidnapped should be part of this, immediate release. That should be the beginning of it. An effort should be made to engage in conversation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Let's face it, this has gone on for decades. Whatever the rationale from the beginning, it has now reached an intolerable level. we need to have a resolution in the Middle East that gives some promise for the future.
Have you
noticed what you're hearing more now? Now you're hearing more politicians speak up and say this has been going on for decades, which they were not saying before. So see what's happening?
told the president, the White House, you think it's time for a ceasefire? Because that is a word that the president is intentionally not using.
Well, believe me, what I said earlier about ceasefires under circumstances, for example, the release of those who have been kidnapped as part of it, indication that this is a good faith effort on the part of the other side. But no, I've not communicated with the White House on that.
Well, they heard you now. Senator Lindsey Graham.
And then it cuts off like right there. So you're not going to hear that part. I think that part cuts off.
On CNN this week.
Yeah, it cuts off at that part. So yeah. Learn something new every day. Never heard of Dick, but he was the first senator to do so. But he's not alone. Connecticut folks, shout out to you if you're in the chat. Apparently, Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, my new Gaza statement, it's time for Israel friends to recognize that the current approach is causing an unacceptable level of civilian harm and does not appear likely to achieve the goal of ending the threat from Hamas. I urge Israel to immediately reconsider its approach. And he has a statement here where he says, let me go up here. As I've said consistently, Israel has a right and obligation to defend its people from terror attacks like the horrific events on October 7th. The Hamas terrorists who planned and executed those attacks must be held accountable, and the ability of Hamas to carry out similar attacks in the future must be eliminated. To this, I always push back when they say that Israel has a right to defend itself, because they're telling you that the Palestinians don't have a right to defend theirself. That's what they're telling you. It's time for Israel and friends to recognize that the current operational approach is causing an unacceptable level of civilian harm and does not appear likely to achieve the goal of permanently ending the threat from Hamas. As we have learned from America's own counterterrorism campaigns, disproportionately large numbers of civilian casualties come with a moral cost, but also a strategic cost, as terrorist groups feed off of the grievances caused by civilian harm. I share Israel's desire to destroy the threat from Hamas, and I know Israel cares about the impact of this war on innocent Palestinians. I disagree with that. I disagree with that part of his statement. I don't think that they do. But even as they track Hamas hideouts inside and below mosques, apartment buildings, and schools. But the way in which the current campaign is being waged, most recently evidenced by the terribly high human cost of the strikes on the Jabalah refugee camp, we talked about that earlier, suggests that they have not struck the right balance between military necessity and proportionality. The current rate of civilian death inside Gaza is unacceptable and unsustainable. I urge Israel to immediately reconsider its approach and shift to a more deliberate and proportionate counterterrorism campaign, strategically, is targeting Hamas and Islamic Jihad leaders and terrorist infrastructure, while more highly prioritizing the safety of civilians in accordance with the law of armed conflict. This does not mean Israel should stop fighting Hamas, but it must take concrete steps to end the current widespread harm to innocent people and children in Gaza. That's Chris Murphy for the Connecticut peeps. And then there's this message here from Ro Khanna. Now, Ro Khanna is not a senator, but these are all the people who came out before Bernie. Just listen to this. All the people who got in front of it before Bernie. So listen to what Ro Khanna said about this.
Ro Khanna is also on the Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for jumping back on. I know you had to get away to vote, and you heard maybe a portion of the Secretary of State speaking before you had to go away. I wanted to get your reaction, though, to hearing from the Secretary of State a shift in tone, saying very clearly that the United States stands with Israel, but also saying that Israel we collectively need to do more to protect Palestinian civilians, and saying that there is a commitment to talks about a humanitarian pause. What does this look like for you?
Well, let me be very clear. The bombing of innocent civilians, women and children, needs to stop. It needs to stop today. And this is an emerging sentiment among Democrats in the House and the Senate, from Senator Chris Murphy all the way to progressive Democrats. Now, I believe Israel has a right to bring Hamas perpetrators to justice. I believe in their right to self-defense. But when we went after Osama bin Laden, we did not bomb Pakistani civilians. When India was attacked with a terrorist attack in Mumbai, they did not just bomb civilians. So we need to look at how surgically Hamas perpetrators can be brought to justice, but the bombing that is on CNN and on everyone's social media, that needs to end.
Did you hear what he just said there towards the end? The bombings that are on CNN, but also everyone's social media. I told you guys, it's everywhere, everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, so everybody sees it. But I thought it was interesting that he brought up Osama bin Laden when Barack Obama, that was during Barack Obama's presidency, when they went after Barack Obama. This part is true. The US government wasn't just like, okay, let's just bomb all the innocent civilians until this guy comes out. They went directly after him. Now, that's not to excuse the US from other war crimes that the US government has done. But I think it shows you something when you look at Bernie Sanders. And I have to add this part here towards the end. And that is this. After everything that you have seen, not just tonight, but the other times that I've talked about Bernie's shiftiness since I've had this show, there's no way we can all sit here and believe that if Bernie Sanders actually would have won the presidency, which, let's be clear, the DNC wouldn't have allowed him to, but let's just say hypothetically, he actually won the presidency in 2020, Bernie Sanders would have never fought for most of those things on that list. Bernie Sanders wouldn't have fought for Medicare for all, because how are you going to fight for it? It's not going to pass in the House or the Senate. That was something he never answered. He never explained how he would get that to pass when there weren't the votes for it to pass. So we're supposed to believe that Bernie Sanders would actually push back on big pharma and big corporations when Bernie Sanders can't even sit up here in that whatever grander speech that he has, and he can't even say we need a ceasefire now. He has to skirt around the issue and say we need a humanitarian pause instead of just saying we need a ceasefire now. Do you honestly believe that Bernie, if he did win, that he would actually push back against powerful entities? Let me tell you, here's the big test. If you can't push back against AIPAC, Netanyahu, I don't believe you're going to push back against Big Pharma, Wall Street, and the military industrial complex. That's my test for everybody going forward. You can use that test for politicians too if you want. But that would tell you something. Let's go to some of the comments and we'll get to the next story. Tia says, yeah, let's ignore the fact that this war has been going on for longer than most of us have been alive. Yes. Oz the Boomer says, shut the hell up, you lying con man. This is all your fault, Bernie. Shame on you. Yep. Thank you for the super chat, Jay. Dick Durbin is my senator. Well, hello there then, Jay. He only spoke in favor of a ceasefire after he voted in favor of the genocide. Make no mistake, he did it not because it's right, but just to save his ass. There you go. Thank you, Janice. Israel only has the right to defend itself within its own borders. It has no right to defend itself on land it illegally occupies. That isn't defense. That's a good point there as well, Janice. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric, and then we'll go to the last story. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. We need an amendment to the Constitution's federal and state that guarantees a right to financing for investigative reporting, full, robust financing. Doesn't matter if we're investigating your government, you still have to finance us. Interesting. And thank you for this tip, Hemp Carr. Ralph Nader, if you have not met with the Israeli peace movement, you should, I think, do so. That you can play a part in the historic effort to establish a broad and deep peace between the two Semitic peoples. The exchange should be videotaped and widely distributed to further the cause of peace and to witness Abraham Foxman dialoguing without his customary lines that evade the issues. Thank you for that, Hemp.